The Persona series are games that have been at the back of my mind for a long time. I always knew their critical acclaim but ignored them until recently. And all I can say is, wow. Alright, so I usually don't make these kinds of videos in general. This is the first review/video essay kind of video I've ever produced, and I wanted to try it out and hopefully put enough of my own spin on it so that it makes for a unique watch. This may be a long video, but I hope that you can give it a chance and come along with me on my somewhat long-winded journey through the Persona series. And another note, I did just say the Persona series, but the actual games I am referring to will be Persona 3, 4, 5, and then a few small notes of the spin-off games. After talking about each game without spoilers, there will be a section right after each one discussing spoilers to cover specifics. I want to talk about the whole games, spoilers and all, so that I don't have to worry about it, and get all my thoughts out. I'm not making this video as a plot synopsis of the games. It is simply a video of my thoughts and critiques on the series and explaining why it had such a hard-hitting impact on me in particular. With all of that said and out of the way, I hope you enjoy the video.
Good morning. How are you feeling? I'm hot.
So to give a little bit of background between me and this game, I had a PS4 when Persona 5 released, but didn't even hear about the game since I was too busy playing Star Wars Battlefront 1 for the 200th hour. The first time I actually heard about it was through PlayStation Access, where I saw this clip.
I won't say that though. I'll say my game of the year so far is Persona 5, because it's an incredible fusion of narrative and artistic flair that perfectly captures the fire of youthful rebellion.
And I was like, oh, that's cool, but it's probably just a cool menu and that's it. Plus, anime game, anime's weird, so gross, skip that, easy. As time went on, I didn't hear too much about the game, but it had been at the back of my mind here and there when people would bring it up on YouTube videos saying how good it is. But once again, anime game, so yeah. Fast forward to the year. I started watching anime and learned that it is not all lolly bait and tentacles, just most of it is. So there, I got into anime and my life proceeded just as normal until, it was announced in June of 2022 that Persona 5 Royal and Persona 3 Portable will be added to Xbox Game Pass, with Persona 4 Golden already having been ported to PC. I was actually pretty hyped at this announcement, as it allowed me to finally try out Persona 5 Royal, the best version of the game I had heard a lot of good things about. So, during my winter break of 2022, I thought sure, why not, and booted up Persona 5 Royal on my Steam Deck, and holy shit. The opening mission, you're the suave dude in a black leather outfit that is definitely not a sexy thing. I swear, I promise, Mom, please, it's not. Then boom, boom, it hits you with some acrobatic combat. The fucking music slaps you across the face like your ex-girlfriend as you're guided by mysterious voices to escape this casino. You see this mysterious lady who does badass moves, and I'm just sitting here thinking, what the actual fuck is going on? Then I get captured and drugged and beat up by cops. After this bananas intro, I was all in. I was dying to figure out the secrets of this game and what it had in store for me and what the overall story was in general. However, it was at this moment that the game gives me probably the biggest reality check I got throughout the whole series. It has you going through the day-to-day of a high school student where everyone just hates you. And I was just sitting here like, what the hell? This is just my experience of high school. I thought this game was supposed to be fun. However, as time went on and we got introduced to the first main dungeon and how the mechanics of this world worked and how the main characters actually do what they're able to do, I was pretty intrigued. I was instantly entranced by one character.
You so fucking precious when you smile.
Morgana. I mean, come on. I love this little guy. He's my little guy. He stays at your house and can sleep on your stomach when you're sleeping. I love Morgana. He's just a cocky little guy, and I adore him. And the game just kept going, adding more characters, more minigames, more intriguing plot lines inside and outside of the dungeons of the game. It is a game style that I think is truly unique in its exquisite execution. The combat system is turn-based combat, which I know is off-putting for a lot of people, but personally I have no problem with it. Each of your allies, however, in this combat is strengthened in battle and then gain more abilities the more time you spend with them outside of the dungeons after school. This encouraged me to spend time with characters I already wanted to spend time with because of how naturally they were written. From what I have seen and heard from people that played the original version and the Royal version, apparently there were multiple changes to combat made to Royal that spanned from quality of life to showtime attacks. Now, let me just talk about showtime attacks. These showtime attacks not only did a crap ton of damage when you used them in combat, but also showcased cute dynamics within your group, such as dudes being bros, an elegant Japanese dance, and being beat up by women in a wrestling arena. Truly, everything I can ever ask for in my entire life. All of these stylish moves, personas, menu look, and the fight music that plays when you're doing each encounter not only knocked me out of my chair the first time I experienced each of these, but oozed an incredible amount of style that makes 10, 20, 100, 1,000 encounters in the game much more tolerable than it would have felt otherwise. Remember this can be important later on in the video. As far as the dungeons themselves, each one being a unique representation of the current antagonist's psyche and intentions not only gives the developers a lot of breathing room of how they want to design these batshit insane dungeons, but allows for many unique puzzles and aesthetics. Like, oh, this guy's a narcissistic predator who thinks he's untouchable? Yeah, his dungeon is an entire castle that extends to all of the land he considers to be his domain. All of the common enemies wear knight armor, and the theme of the dungeon sounds like it comes from a cheesy 90s porno. I would give more detailed examples in later dungeons, but honestly I think half of the fun of the dungeons come from their eventual reveals and exploring them yourselves. So I only gave that dungeon as an early example within the game. Each of these dungeons keep the gameplay refreshing, and after you beat a dungeon, you're rewarded with a bunch of downtime provided you scheduled it correctly. All these elements of the game combine to you legitimately thinking, okay, so I have to do my homework now so that I can get my high school crush to go on fake dates with me to help her friend out so that way I can make sure to plan my studies before we go to an alternate dimension and beat up criminals. Meanwhile, you realize you're playing a game in the dark of your living room, it is 3 a.m., and you are not in school anymore, you're a grown-ass man. After all of that, you must be thinking, wow, Dylan, those are all pretty positive things to say about the game. You must have very little faults that you think the game has. And you would be partly right, but I do have a handful of criticisms that bring down my experience just a little bit. Firstly, remember how a bit ago I mentioned that spending time with your friends outside of dungeons can give you new abilities to do better inside combat? Well, not only do some of these abilities completely break the balance of common battles in the mid to late game, but some of these abilities are far superior to other ones. For example, you spend your time with one of your teammates outside school because he is an artist and a funny lobster man. His ability that he gives you is turning cards you find around the game into skill cards to teach your personas different moves. I literally never use this in my game, as if I wanted new abilities, I would just fuse a new persona, and I wasn't doing the Twins Confidant in my playthrough, so I had no reason for skill cards anyway. Meanwhile, let me go talk to my friend at church, who's also a local shogi champion, and she gives you the ability to swap teammates in and out throughout combat. So yeah, there are more abilities like this that not only introduce new mechanics, but some of the mechanics cut the skill curve in half. Other examples are just instantly kill an enemy in a dungeon if you're a lot higher level compared to them, and change an ambush into an interrogation where you basically can just one-hit kill them. This isn't too big of a deal since a lot of the abilities I didn't fully utilize in my first run because I thought it broke the balance if I tried to spam them too much. Alright, so in order to continue listing my gripes with Persona 5 Royal, I gotta delve into spoilers now. So go play the whole game, come back, and then listen to my totally objective and correct opinions, and hopefully you survived that 100-hour game, so I applaud you. Alright, on to spoilers. Alright, so now that we filtered the babies out who haven't played Peak, let's keep being negative about said Peak. As you would most likely expect, not all of the dungeons in Persona 5 Royal are created equal. Dungeons like Kenshiro's Palace, and especially the Mementos dungeon, were notable low points in my playthrough. Kenshiro's Palace I can kinda excuse because of the focus on Best Girl Makoto and the bangin' palace theme. And Mementos was also described to me as a very important element of the game and to not to forget going there, as the game would very, very kindly constantly remind you. However, one of my biggest pet peeves in video games in general is having to grind to get the actual fun content. Mementos is the literal definition of this. where I would enter mementos and sweep the enemies in there by just running into them with a frickin' car, since going in and out of combat wasted way too much time rather than me just running them over and going on to the next floor. That would be fine if that's all it was, but the final dungeons require you to explore every floor of mementos. So at the end of the game, I spent whole hours trying to speedrun all of mementos because I didn't do it much at all during my first playthrough. That on its own made the last palace in the base game my least favorite palace. But to my dismay, that was just to get to the entrance to start the final dungeon. My major problem with the last dungeon itself is that you take this grounded story about high school students fighting evil with some supernatural powers and crank the JRPG tropes to Mach 20 when it is revealed that the man who's been aiding you this whole time is just an evil god that you have to defeat because having the final boss being the main villain that you have built up through the whole game that has connected all the plot points together is just not enough. No, we have to make a supernatural teenagers versus god fight happen just because. Alright, so that was a decent bit of negative stuff, but Persona 5 Royal didn't just add quality of life features in general. One of its biggest selling points is that it adds a dungeon at the end of the base Persona 5 game, provided you have leveled up Maruki up to the appropriate rank, and thankfully this dungeon is the best one in the game, and Maruki is the best villain of the whole game. Getting more time with Akechi after he got pancaked was fun, but while I like Samir's storyline in the Persona 5 Royal expansion, having her introduced so early in the story but just not have her join into the literal last dungeon just felt like such a waste to me. I know Samir has a lot of fans online, but personally I just can't say I like her character any more than just a little bit, because of how awkward her fitting into the group was, because for all intents and purposes, she should have joined the group much sooner than she did, but just decided not to. Also, Ryuji getting beat up for saving everyone's lives is dumb, but everyone knows that's dumb, but I just had to mention it. Overall, Persona 5 Royal proved to be an incredible game to me, and while I do have complaints I do consider to be valid and hold against the game, it cannot be denied that this game opened the door for me playing the rest of the Persona games and making JRPGs just a little more accessible in my mind. Play it, you will not regret it. Morgana is great, you guys just suck. Alright, next game. Alright, after Persona 5 Royal, I was fiending for more. I love the characters, the world, the style of the game, which is why I decided to jump right into Persona Strikers, baby.
No floofing.
Alright, so I was dying to see the main cast again after the first game, and Persona Strikers was here to deliver it in spades. New characters, more context and plot for the undeveloped character from the last game, and this game has my favorite soundtrack out of all the Persona series so far. The high-octane gameplay, along with the music that makes you want to wreck a whole city, goes so well together, and a linear action adventure that expands on the last game is always welcome to me. Plus, you can play as Makoto through the whole game, so it is an absolute win no matter what. The gameplay is fluid, and I applaud the development team of this game for blending Persona's combat identities into real-time action, making the gameplay feeling fresh to me, and it was so satisfying that I had no problem playing through the whole game without getting bored of the combat. Without getting into too many spoilers, my main gripe with the game is just the last section of the game. It has the exact same problem, in my opinion, of Persona 5 Royal, to the point that I was just wondering if it was even a new boss, because it just seemed like I was just replaying the last dungeon of the last game. Overall, yes, it was very fun. I needed to see the characters after the post-game depression that Persona 5 Royal gives you. Finishing Strikers left me feeling satisfied and made me ready to move on to the next game, Persona 4 Golden.
I'm sorry, Teddy. Only people have human rights.
Hot off the trails of Persona 5 Strikers, I wanted to jump straight into Persona 4 Golden, a game I know is beloved by many Persona fans worldwide, and I'm here to say that I think it's pretty good. Now hold on, there's a lot of elements I like, especially when compared to its predecessor Persona 3, but when put into the whole context of the whole series, it falls flat for me in a couple key areas. Firstly, I will start off by explaining the game in general, then I will dive into my specific thoughts afterwards. In Persona 4 Golden, the game opens as you play as a student named Yu Narakami, as he arrives in a small town in rural Japan to stay there for about a year. In this small town, the people around you declare that there's not much to do, but regardless, you end up making friends at the school you attend, join clubs, and do some minigames around town. Automatically, I really like the change in pace the games had from one another. It makes each one more distinct, which therefore increases the game's replayability. In Persona 5 Royal, the game started with a giant bank heist that you then get arrested and interrogated. Meanwhile, in Persona 4 Golden, it's like you blew up a save file of Stardew Valley, getting introduced to your friends and family slowly, and by the end, forming a tight bond with them. Both games, unsurprisingly, have a very similar gameplay loop of being a high school student during the day, progressing friendships around town, and then in the evenings go fight dungeons to rid the world of evil. The small-scale nature of the setting and narrative is very charming, and I found myself quickly bonding to the characters. Many people have made this comparison, but Persona 4 has a lot of similarities to JoJo Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, where it is a group of friends teaming up to fight against a local serial killer in a small town. And I love JoJo Part 4, so I will start off by stating what I love about the game. Persona 4 being set in a small town and having a very local problem to deal with makes each dramatic event in the town hit much harder, as you have interacted with those people before, and have more of a connection than, say, when a random bystander would get killed in an accident in Persona 5. Furthermore, the characters in Persona 4 are by far the biggest strength of the game. Kanji, Yosuke, Riz, Naoto, and Chie are all fantastic characters, and each of their character arcs were really compelling to me. Kanji and Yosuke in particular, I really loved their humor, and by the end of the game, I felt like they had been fleshed out to the point that they were real people, and I wanted to spend more time with them. These fantastic characters are even further elevated when you consider the humor this game has. Persona 4 probably has the funniest moments in the series, and that is probably because this game is where you see the most of the group just sitting around and talking for the most amount of times, as you would expect in a teenage friend group in high school. The soundtrack once again slaps, and while it's not my favorite soundtrack in the series, it cannot be denied that this soundtrack packs some fucking bangers.
I hold out, I reach out to the truth of my life, seeking the peace of the whole moment to now break away. Oh God, let me out, can you let me out? Can you set me free from this that in the world safe? Need a last beat in the soul.
I will admit that I was spoiled of who the killer was before I played Persona 4, just because I was on the Persona subreddit before I started the game, and while it did lessen the impact, I still enjoyed the story the whole way through. Still, the best way to go in is as blind as possible. Alright, well now with all the good things I have to say are out of the way, I will now present what didn't really land for me when I was playing this game. The part that fell flat the most for me was the dungeon crawling and combat of the game. I went in with tempered expectations, knowing that the combat would not be as fluid or stylish as Persona 5, because it's an older title. But the way the combat is presented in this game just did not engage me at all. All of the dungeons in Persona 4 follow the exact same formula, which is 10 or so floors of hallways trying to find the stairs to then proceed until you reach the top for the final boss fight. Here's the thing about these floors though, I don't know for sure if it's just me not being as experienced at outmaneuvering the AI as I was in later games like Persona 3, but it is very hard to try and run away from a shadow that is chasing you compared to Persona 3 and Persona 5, which means in certain areas that you don't have a boss blocking progression, you cannot move on unless you fight these basic enemies. This could be forgiven if the dungeons each have a unique gimmick or aesthetic to them, but oftentimes it is just the same hallway textures from the bottom to top of each dungeon. Each dungeon being designed like this makes them all blend together in my mind, even though each dungeon is supposed to be a reflection of the subconscious of each person it represents. It makes all dungeons feel the same, and you get tired of the combat much quicker than I did in Persona 5. The combat system itself is serviceable, and you can see how it evolved into the Persona 5 combat system, but it gets the job done with some highlights like teammates being able to do combat moves as a less flashy way of showtimes. Party members can also follow up to do some extra actions like kill one enemy or knock down one enemy, stuff like that. Alright, with all that being said, I'm now going to delve into the spoiler section of Persona 4 Golden. Despite my gripes, I highly recommend playing Persona 4. It is an experience I will keep with me for a long time. Alright, now time for spoilers. Let's go. When discussing what I love about Persona 4, the amount that I cared for the characters cannot be overstated. Nanako, for example, spending time with her throughout the game made me realize that she is one of the most precious things ever. I would kill anyone who hurts her, which is ironic because of you know. Morbid jokes aside, I went in knowing that Adachi is the killer of Persona 4, and while the twist of the delivery driver possibly being the true killer did initially throw me through a loop, I think it was handled pretty well. I enjoy villains who are evil for the sake of being evil, just because they like it or just because they're a bad person. It can make for some interesting writing if done well. While I did not max out the Adachi confidant in my playthrough, I enjoyed him as a character to enjoy his boss fight, even if the dungeon wasn't my favorite with having to run past shadows, which is awful in this game. While I did enjoy Adachi's boss fight and how his persona is similar to the main character's starting persona, having the final boss in the base Persona 4 game be yet another god that wants to control people and teenagers have to fight him with the power of friendship still annoyed me. While once again I know it is a common JRPG trope, it still bothered me since Persona 4 is even more grounded than Persona 5, and I felt that the phenomenon of the TV world would be fine unexplained, and all you have to do is take down Adachi. That's my personal take at least. This doesn't even account for the true ending that Persona 4 Golden added to the game, where you have to fight the final boss, gas station handshake guy, who I guess is also a god or something. I don't know because I didn't play that part because I didn't rank up the added character of Marie enough. Honestly, I'm glad I didn't play it because just watching the gameplay online, it literally just looks like the same thing of evil god judges humanity unfairly so teenagers have to prove it wrong kind of thing. The true ending cutscene is very cute though and made me happy. Also, Marie didn't bother me too much, she was alright, not many feelings much on that front. Persona 4 from a series perspective is my personal low point with the mainline games, mainly because of how the traversal of dungeons functions combined with how they all sort of blend together, while the game is trying to tell you that they are unique and special to each person. In reality, it just feels like the same design with a change in music. But at the same time, you do get Kanji doing the Birth of Venus pose in the game, so I would say it balances out. Now that we have gotten past my most controversial part of the video, let's talk about Persona 3 FES and how it absolutely blew me away.
More like stupe aced effective.
Alright, so before we get into this section, I have a few important details that I need to disclose in order to inform some of the opinions I'm about to say in this section. Firstly, I played Persona 3 FES as I deemed that it is very important to have 3D graphics throughout the whole game for me, which Persona 3 Portable lacks, so I did not experience any content from the FEMC route. Secondly, I emulated Persona 3 FES and used fast forward and save states in my playthrough that would avoid me having to redo entire sections if I lost a fight, and making some of the more technically challenging aspects lessened. Lastly, I did not use the original version of FES in my playthrough. I played the modded version of Persona 3 FES that allows you to control all of your team members manually, which famously in the vanilla version of the game you are unable to do and can only use party commands. Some of you may already think that I did not play Persona 3 optimally in this scenario because of how I played it and the modifications I made to the game. However, to that I say, I'm a lazy gamer, because honestly, if I'm given the option to bypass certain limitations that are seen by many in retrospect as hurtful to the overall game experience, I have no personal problem with choosing that option. There can be an argument for playing the game exactly the way the developers intended the game to be, and that is an opinion just as valid as my opinion. It's just at the end of the day, it's my personal preference. With all of that out of the way, let me just say, Persona 3 FES absolutely fucks. I adored my time in Persona 3 thoroughly. Not only does, in my opinion, the dungeon crawling seem to function much smoother in Persona 3, but the themes explored in the game were much more profound to me personally, that it has left a mark on me that stays to this day. Firstly, let's start with my bold opinion that I think the dungeon crawling in Persona 3 is better than in Persona 4. The biggest difference between dungeons in Persona 4 and Tartarus in Persona 3 is the fact that in Persona 3, there is only one dungeon that you progress throughout the entire game. While this may seem like a bad thing and that it will get very tedious very fast, for me it is all about how the dungeon is framed within the game. Initially, Tartarus is presented to you as this massive towering structure, and your curiosity about what is in there and what is at the top is one of the main motivations for wanting to scale it in the first place. Tartarus, aside from the smaller aesthetic changes as you ascend it, very much has the design of Persona 4 dungeons, where a lot of hallways and features are the same from level to level. But here in Persona 3, I'm able to forgive it much more because Tartarus is only one dungeon, so it being very uniform makes more sense than in Persona 4, where it is stated that the TV world for each character is different based on their shadow's outlook. So I don't mind as much that the layouts from floor to floor are very similar to one another because it gives this technical limitation a reason for being like that within the plot. One of my main gripes with the Persona 4 dungeons was that it was much harder to avoid combat if you didn't want to run through a bunch of random fights, if you just wanted to make your way to the boss fight and therefore progress the story. However, in Persona 3, it felt the balance was much nicer because while yes, shadows can pursue you and can catch you if you make a mistake while they are chasing you, you can avoid combat with shadows if you time your movements properly and very thoughtfully. This allowed me to get pretty good at traversing Tartarus throughout the game, and if I was ever not in the mood for dungeon crawling and just wanted to progress the story, it was much easier to find the stairs and move to the boss fights quicker, which kept the pace going for me to never feel too bored when exploring Tartarus. All of this mixed in with the interesting concepts only in this game, like allowing your party members to split off from you and being able to loot and fight battles by themselves, and each member having a condition meter forcing you to pace yourself, adds more options and challenges that engage the player. It makes me ask myself the question of, I really want to loot everything on this floor but might not have the time because of the Reaper. Are my party members in good enough condition to split up and search for me? Giving me more options of how I'd like to traverse the dungeons and also adding limitations so that I also can't just get everything I want was very refreshing, making it seem less like a world that revolves around me and more like Tartarus is an unforgiving place and the only way I can succeed is if I think intelligently and tactically. Basically, Persona 3's dungeon is similar to how Persona 4 dungeons work, but with the tweaks that this game has made, it makes a world of difference to me and brought me back from the feeling of Persona 5's, man, I can't decide what I want to do more of right now, hang out with my high school friends or fight shadow creatures. And I think when these tough decisions are given to the player, not only does it make you more invested in what you choose to do, but it also encourages multiple playthroughs if you miss something in either area of the game. That is what I think Persona games do at their best. Make you feel like the protagonist who must choose your own balance and seek out what you want to seek out in this world you are placed in. Speaking of this game's social system, let's talk about Persona 3's greatest strength, its characters and plot. This game opens up with what I think is one of the best, if not the best, cutscenes in the modern Persona trilogy. While Persona 5 opens with a bananas bank heist scene with music that makes you want to jump out of your seat and groove, and Persona 4's quiet and subtle opening of meeting your family in a quiet town, Persona 3 opens with a tone full of anxiety and tension straight out of a horror movie. This eerie buzzing sound is at the forefront of the start of the cutscene, accompanying a claustrophobic feeling of Japan. This scene gets interrupted by a woman's eye and rushing water. Blood in an arcade game is shown before panning back to the girl briefly seen earlier. This almost frantic cutting between perspectives and certain shots makes you wonder, why am I getting anxious over nothing? The sounds that the cutscene uses makes you feel on edge before you even see anything off-putting or disturbing. When the cutscene goes back to the girl crying on the floor, it is shown she has a gun. She points it at her own head, hesitating, hearing rushing water overwhelming. Train wheels start squealing, heavy breathing, until she ultimately drops her gun on the floor and is shown weeping through the window while the opening theme, Burn My Dread, goes into full volume. The cutscene goes on, showing oddities after a clock strikes midnight before the main character ultimately arrives in the dorm where he will be staying at. He signs a mysterious contract and meets the girl from earlier who almost shoots you. When I tell you that this cutscene had me intrigued, on edge, creeped out, and hyped, I mean it. I went into Persona 3 knowing little to nothing, and to be greeted with such an intense atmosphere when contrasted with the previous games, I knew this game was something special. Rather than making the player hyped up for a heist or at ease to be in a quiet town, Persona 3 throws you so far forward that you miss the edge of your seat completely, and it has only been 5 minutes until you started the game. I apologize for focusing so much on the introduction of the game, but I believe it is a perfect setup for this game and the tone it is trying to go for throughout the story. The game continues on and you are introduced to more characters, more social links to do outside the dungeon crawling, and more events that throw the plot forward. Persona 3's focus on the idea of death and what it means to face it and how you should live your life when directly facing it hits hard, as it is a pretty heavy topic pretty much everyone has thought of at one point. As the main cast expands, the theme of death is reinforced and makes for a thematically consistent and heavy-hitting experience. This is the first Persona game where hanging out with your friends outside of the dungeon crawling doesn't actually give you any new abilities in combat, outside of just giving you more XP when fusing personas. Which is a bummer, but it isn't a deal breaker for me personally or anything. Furthermore, this is a game where social links are first introduced, and while some of them have stories that hit hard, like Akanari's, some social links are a complete miss, like the Student Council social link or Nozomi's social link. Despite this roughness, there is a system in Persona 3 where if you make decisions that the person you are hanging out with does not like, your social link can decrease or even break depending on what you decide to do, which honestly I kinda liked. This makes the dialogue choices you make in the game seem like they actually matter and have weight to the person you say them to. Now, it seems like a lot of the things I have to say about Persona 3 FES are positive, but I do have some things I didn't like as much in the game as well. My biggest gripe that I can give in the spoiler-free section is that it can take a long time for social links to open up to the player. For example, if I wanted to start a social link with Yukari, who's one of the first characters you meet in the game, you will have to wait until July 24th, which is 4 in-game months between then and when you start the game. This doesn't sound too bad, just focus on the other social links in the meantime. The problem with that is, a lot of the social links are like this, where they get introduced with a big gap between one another. So if you are efficient with your time, you will often skip entire days because there's literally nothing to do or progress with your social links or stats. I will also mention, it does take a good amount of time for the story of the game to actually get rolling and feel like you are progressing plot-wise at a decent pace, as the beginning of the game is getting oriented with the characters and trying to follow the breadcrumbs of the mystery of the Dark Hour and Tartarus. Now, as with the previous games discussed, Persona 3 also has a version of it with added content. This version is called Persona 3 FES. Persona 3 FES's main content is an added chapter that you are supposed to play after you beat the base game of Persona 3, called The Answer. I will discuss it more in the spoiler section, but for now I will just say that The Answer does not have nearly as strong of a plot as the base game does, but there are certain elements of it that I really love. The Answer's biggest misstep, though, is the combat, where you play the game from a different perspective and the game is made much harder in basic combat encounters. But honestly, it just comes off as making each battle flow less and throwing high-level enemies at you rather than actually facing more difficult challenges than you had to before. Alright, now with all that out of the way, I'm going to discuss Persona 3 spoilers. I highly recommend playing Persona 3. Honestly, maybe just play Reload and watch videos of The Answer. But skip to this time code if you would like to avoid Persona 3 spoilers in general. So in Persona 3, you are met with a challenge. Find out the secrets of the Dark Hour and explore Tartarus in order to get these answers. Throughout the game, you are met with a group of antagonists called Strega, who want to keep the Dark Hour alive and well, directly opposing the protagonists. If that description sounds vague, then you would be correct. Strega for me was incredibly missed potential, as they have some interesting ideas like being child experiments in their childhoods, but honestly the execution of explaining their motivations and goals was lost on me, and it just seemed like a misdirection to hide the main antagonist of the game, Ikatsuki/Nyx. The main thing that I appreciated about Strega did story-wise was kill one of the best characters in the game in cold blood, that being Shinjiro. Throughout the game, I grew to love Shinjiro and his personality and dynamic within the group. He looks like a scary guy, but in reality he is probably the kindest person on the team deep down. His final scene with Ken before saving his life is not only heartbreaking, but solidifies Shinjiro as a good man who had made some mistakes, but did everything he can to correct them at the end. Shinjiro's death is not only effective to the player as they have grown attached to Shinjiro, but also makes the player more motivated than ever to beat Strega and then later on, beat Nyx. Speaking of Nyx, the whole ending sequence of the game is incredible. With each of the main cast accepting their own deaths and accepting what they're about to face is basically impossible to overcome, but still want to do it anyway because they want to face their death head on with no fear if they lose. This idea is so metal and motivational that it had me dreading the fight because of how well the game establishes the stakes of what this final battle means, not just for the main cast, but for everyone on Earth. The final fight itself is amazing. The battle music goes so hard, and in the end, the main character sacrificing himself and his soul to prevent his friends and the world from perishing really tugged at your heartstrings. I love that he sticks around to fulfill his promise with his friends to meet up together on the rooftop to celebrate their victory. His body only living just to fulfill that one goal, and when he fulfills that goal, and all of his friends remember each other and meet up, he passes away in one of the most beautiful scenes I have ever seen in a video game.
After fighting alongside you and facing the world's end, I finally began to understand what it means to live. Thinking for yourself, not running away, accepting the inevitable. All things eventually come to an end. Every living thing will one day disappear. Only by accepting this can one discover what they truly want, what the meaning of their life will be. And so, I made up my mind. I decided that I would continue to protect you. I want to be your strength. I know I'm not the only one who can do this, but that's okay. My life will be worth living if it's for this reason. I'll keep on living no matter what, so that I can protect you. Thank you for everything. You must be tired. Please, get some rest. I'll stay right here with you.
Whenever I hear the music that plays in this scene, I still get the feels. What an amazing ending. The answer, on the other hand, is not as easy to diagnose. I've already mentioned how the gameplay of the answer is repetitive and how the story at times just seems to be there just to be there, but there is one moment in the answer that really sticks with me and makes the game from one of a kind to a masterpiece in my mind. This scene involves Yukari, who after the answer quickly became my favorite character in the game. On the surface, Yukari at the start of Persona 3 seems rude and distant from everyone around her, but as the game progresses, you find that she's extremely emotionally conflicted with the events that led to her father's death, as well as how her mother is acting in current day and how she despises her. However, when the main character Persona 3 Makoto goes to meet up with Yukari after she storms off after an emotionally charged reveal that her father may have created this whole mess, Yukari finally, after all this time, spills her heart out and speaks from her heart about how she feels and where she can even go from now, since everything she fights for is seemingly has been a lie. Makoto gives her advice that she needs to keep going despite whatever her father has done, and she instinctively lashes out at Makoto. However, she starts listening to Makoto's advice, and afterwards you have the opportunity to give Yukari a hug, and that hug is one of the most heartwarming moments of the game. Later on, it is revealed that Yukari's father is not responsible for the mess that the main characters find they are in at the moment, and that things seem to be looking up for her. Yukari is still mad at her mother for being emotionally distant and seeing lots of men since her father died. However, in the answer, you see that when the group is fighting with one another given the choice to bring you back, the biggest advocate for this choice is Yukari, and the game portrays this decision as selfish, which it is. A lot of people do not like this choice because it feels it conflicts with her growth, but to me it shows how easy it is to act irrationally if you lose someone you love, just as Yukari's mother did. This reaction from Yukari is all the more understandable if the player actually dates Yukari in the game as well, because she also lost someone she deeply cares about. This depth that Yukari is given in Persona 3 in the answer makes her such a tragic character and honestly made Persona 3 stick with me all the more. Persona 3 FES is not a flawless game. It has many faults which hopefully Persona 3 Reload will fix when it releases soon. However, the way it is differentiated from Persona 4 in its dungeon crawling plus the story that Persona 3 tells makes Persona 3 my favorite Persona game, and I really hope that Persona 3 Reload becomes the perfect remake that we are all hoping it will be. Persona is a series that absolutely came out of nowhere for me. I have been known to tell my friends that I do not like JRPGs, whether it be for the monotonous combat, overly complex stories, or convoluted endings. However, Persona as a series is one of the most unique game series I have ever played. Each game has a very different feel from one another in each of its stories, and the combat builds and improves after each entry. The part, however, that elevates Persona a step above other RPGs is the social system blending with the dungeon crawling. Being able to get satisfying turn-based combat mixed with the social sim aspects of making friends and hearing very personal stories about each one of them makes for such a lightning in a bottle formula. And it isn't just me. After the release of Persona 5, the Persona series exploded in popularity, and the series has never been in a better spot for more content like Persona 3 Reload or Persona 6, which I can't wait to play when I'm ashes sitting in an urn, sitting at my desktop. It is truly a series I can never forget, and they have made a permanent fan out of me. I can only hope that the West sees this style of RPG and thinks to make it more common. Until then, I'm going to be glued to my couch playing Persona 3 Reload. The Persona series changed my brain chemistry to not only being able to give JRPGs more of a chance in my mind and broaden my horizons to different types of games, but also by impacting me with such personal stories that only this formula of game can offer. Spending time with the characters you love and fighting against impossible odds together. Thank you everyone for watching this video, as I'm exhausted as of the writing of this script. This video has truly been a passion project of mine over the past few weeks, and I've been brainstorming months before that. I hope you guys like this content and want to see more of it in the future. I have lots of ideas, not just video game related, I would like to explore and talk about. If that interests you, or if you would like more Persona content like my thoughts on spin-off games or Persona 3 Reload, let me know. Thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.